Hey guys, did you know that in the secret archives there once lay blueprints for a real Soviet Godzilla on tracks? A machine that was supposed to send whole armies running just by its appearance. Today, we'll go behind the scenes of an ambitious and insane engineer's dream, a dream that almost became a nightmare for an entire country. Get comfortable, you're in for a story that'll give you goosebumps. And remember, the most interesting details? Archival photos and diagrams are waiting for you on my channel. So subscribe so you don't miss a single secret. And at the end, there's a key question where your opinion will be crucial. Write in the comments what you think. Did the authorities do the right thing? Let's go. The dream of an iron giant. The birth of an idea. Let's travel back to the late 1920s. The Soviet Union, young, ambitious, not yet fully recovered from the wounds of the Civil War, was already looking to the future. And that future, as it seemed to military strategists back then, was dotted with concrete pillboxes, barbed wire, and lines of trenches. The experience of the First World War had firmly hammered into the heads of generals worldwide the thought, war is a positional deadlock. Two armies butt heads against fortified lines and can't budge for years. Entire lives are spent just to recapture a scrap of land. The Red Army, having passed through the crucible of the Civil War, also thought about how to break such a defense. That's how the idea of deep operation was born, not just to punch a hole, but to burst into it with an armored fist and crush the enemy in its own rear. But to do that, you first had to make that hole. And that's precisely where the image of the perfect tool emerged, the breakthrough tank. Not just a tank, but an armored monster, an invulnerable fortress on tracks. Imagine this. It slowly but inexorably crawls towards enemy positions. No gun can pierce its armor, and it itself showers the enemy with fire from all sides, smashing pillboxes, machine gun nests, and infantry. This was the concept of the land battleship. If a naval battleship is a floating island with hellish firepower, then its land-based brother was meant to be the same kind of king of the battlefield. In 1929, a grand rearmament program was launched in the Soviet Union. A country lagging in industrial development decided to make a leap. And to do this, they began inviting the best, sometimes the most avant-garde minds from all over the world. One such guest was the German engineer Edward Grote, a man with a reputation as a futurist and, let's be frank, a dreamer. He had already introduced Soviet military officials to his creation, the TG-1 tank. The machine was interesting but devilishly complex and unreliable. It disappointed the customers. But Grote wouldn't be himself if he gave up. On the contrary, he aimed for something grandiose, for something that would eclipse all his previous projects. He presented a project known as TG-5 and later as the T-42. This was not just a tank. It was a statement, a machine weighing 80 to 90 tons. For comparison, the most mass-produced tanks of the early 30s weighed 9 to 12 tons. This was a leviathan, a true walking fort. On paper, it looked like the perfect solution to all problems. Its armor, according to calculations, reached 50 to 70 millimeters on the frontal parts, an unheard-of thickness for those years. Its armament was supposed to be all-crushing. Armor, guns, and devilish complexity. What was the T-42? Let's try to picture this behemoth. The core of the design was the idea of all-round defense. The tank had to fight surrounded and repel attacks from all sides. To achieve this, Grote chose a multi-turret layout with two-tiered weapon placement. At the bottom, on the sides of the hull, there would have been two auxiliary turrets with 45mm guns and machine guns. Their task was to fight infantry and light armored vehicles, keeping the little worms away from the Colossus. Higher up, on the roof of the hull, there could have been another turret, possibly even an anti-aircraft one. And this in the early 30s, when aviation was only just beginning to become a serious threat. Well thought out, isn't it? And crowning this pyramid of power was the main citadel, a central turret on a high turret box. They planned to fit a gun with a caliber of up to 107 millimeters into it. This wasn't just a cannon. This was almost a howitzer. Its shells were supposed to crack open concrete fortifications like tin cans. It seemed like the perfect tool for breaking through a line like the Mannerheim Line or the German Siegfried Lines that were just beginning to loom on the horizon. But behind every advantage, a whole host of problems immediately hid. Imagine the crew. In some variants, its size reached 12 to 15 men. That's a whole infantry squad locked inside an iron box. The commander had to not just lead the tank into battle, but coordinate the fire of 5 different firing points. Amid the roar of engines, dust, smoke, and without modern internal communication systems. It's like conducting an orchestra where each musician sits in a separate, soundproofed room. Chaos and confusion would have been inevitable. And now, the running gear. That very devil in the details. To move 90 tons of metal, an incredibly powerful and, alas, incredibly complex construction was needed. The T-42 suspension consisted of 17 paired road wheels per side, assembled into complex bogies. It was a labyrinth of axles, springs, and balancers. Every field repair would have turned into an engineering saga. But that's not all. How do you make such a behemoth turn? A steering wheel from a Moskvich car wouldn't work here. Grote envisioned hydraulic and mechanical servos technologies ahead of their time by about 20 years. Sounds great, but in the reality of the 30s, it meant one thing: wild unreliability. Imagine if the hydraulic cylinders started leaking in battle. That's it. The tank turns into an immobile firing point, a huge and vulnerable target. The heart of the monster was supposed to be a power plant of 1,000 horsepower. Most often, they spoke of 2 engines of 500 horses each. 2 engines, that's double the risk of breakdown, double the headache with maintenance, and insane heat inside the engine compartment. Cooling such a beast was a separate engineering drama. And here we come to the main point. This tank wasn't created as a combat unit. It was created as an answer to the question, but can we? It was an engineering concept, a technology demonstrator, and a display of national might. But wars aren't won by concepts, but by reliable, simple-to-produce, and mass-produced machines. The price of a dream. Why didn't the USSR build Godzilla? While Grote was drawing the fantastic contours of his battleship, other work was already in full swing in the USSR. Soviet engineers like Nikolai Barykov weren't sitting idly by. They were working on their own multi-turret giant, the future T-35. And here begins a story not about technology, but about pragmatism. Let's do a thought experiment. The year is roughly 1932. 2 projects land on a high-ranking military official's desk. Project 1, T-42 futuristic, incredibly powerful, but weighing close to 100 tons. Requires a complete overhaul of factory workshops. New, more powerful cranes, reinforced slipways, special machine tools are needed. Cannot be transported on regular railways. Special transporters need to be designed. It won't cross most bridges. The production cost of one specimen would be like that of a whole company of light tanks. Project 2, T-35 more conservative. Only 50 tons, also multi-turreted, also powerful. It can be produced on existing capacities, for example, at the Leningrad Kirov plant. It already fits within railway clearance limits, though with difficulty. It's cheaper, simpler, and, most importantly, it can be put into series production right now. Which project will the leader of a country choose when it is surrounded by hostile states and urgently, very urgently needs to rearm its army with hundreds and thousands of units of equipment? The answer is obvious. In 1932, the commission of the Red Army's Directorate of Motorization and Mechanization closed the T-42 project. The choice was made in favor of the domestic, more technological and realizable T-35. It was a choice in favor of common sense over brilliant madness. And this choice was absolutely right in historical retrospect. Let's look at the world stage. The Soviet Union wasn't alone in its love for giants. Great Britain, back in 1926, they built the A-1E-1 Independent, the world's first multi-turret heavy tank. It remained a single specimen, an experimental vehicle. Germany, secretly, in violation of the Treaty of Versailles, the Germans created their Neubaufahrzeug NBFZ. Also multi-turreted and very similar to the T-35. Only 5 of them were built, and they were used mainly for parades and propaganda. France had their FCM-2C real monsters from the First World War, which by the 30s were hopelessly obsolete. See the trend? The whole world went through the land battleship disease. It was an evolutionary dead end. The T-42 became its most beautiful, most daring, and most unrealistic peak. Historical analysis. Lessons we must not forget. Why did this concept fail? Let's break it down point by point because the lessons of the T-42 are relevant even today, in the age of drones and cyber warfare. Economics defeats fantasy. A country with limited resources cannot afford the luxury of building one-off wonder machines. War is, alas, largely about economics. You need to count not just the power of one unit, but the combined power of the entire army. 10 reliable medium tanks will almost always be more useful than one super heavy tank that broke down on the way to the battlefield. The USSR learned this lesson and later created the most mass-produced and arguably the best tank of the Second World War, the T-34. Not the most powerful in a one-on-one fight, but technological, reparable, and produced in incredible numbers. Tactics change faster than technology. Grote was designing a tank for yesterday's war, positional, frontal. But already by the mid-30s, it became clear to everyone. The future belonged to speed and maneuver. The Germans later brilliantly demonstrated this with their blitzkrieg tactics, which emphasized light, fast tanks, and close cooperation with aviation. The slow T-42 would have become easy prey for aircraft and artillery in such a war. It would simply have been bypassed and left behind. Complexity is the main enemy of reliability. The worst enemy of a combat vehicle is not the enemy's shell, but a breakdown at the worst possible moment. The more complex the system, the more points of failure it has. Simple, even primitive technology often proves more effective in war. This principle, simpler is better, was tested by fire and blood. Infrastructure is everything. You can create a brilliant machine, but if there are no roads, bridges, railway platforms, or repair bases for it, it is useless. The T-42 ran up against not technical limitations it could have been built, but against the infrastructural collapse its appearance would have caused. The T-42 remained on paper, a proud and sad monument to that era when humanity, fascinated by the power of machines, dreamed of creating the perfect steel soldier. It is a symbol of the passing era of positional warfare and a hello from a world of alternate history where 20-meter armored fortresses would have crawled across battlefields. And the T-35, its more fortunate competitor, did go into series, became a participant in parades on Red Square, and even took part in the first battles of the Great Patriotic War. But its fate was also unenviable. Most of these machines were lost not to enemy shells, but due to technical failures. What can be said about its hypothetical, 3 times more complex brother? Guys, here we are at the most interesting part. So what do you think? Did the Soviet leadership do the right thing by closing the fantastic project and investing effort into more realistic machines? Or perhaps they should have taken a risk and built at least one land battleship to inspire terror at parades and work for propaganda? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's discuss, debate, find the truth together. And if this story hooked you, if you want to keep diving into the secrets of forgotten weapons, alternative projects, and turning points in history, click subscribe and the bell. On the channel, you'll find detailed breakdowns, archival footage, and stories they don't write about in textbooks. Your support in the form of likes and comments is the best way to say thank you and motivate new investigations. See you in the next episode, where there will be even more steel, intrigue, and historical mysteries.